Welcome, traveler, to a story that defies everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. How did a kingdom that Greek philosophers dismissed as a land of barbarians, a place of mountain shepherds and feuding clans, produce the greatest conqueror in human history? How did a nation that could barely defend its own borders transform in a single generation into a force that would bring the mighty Persian Empire to its knees? I am standing here in the shadow of what remains of Pella, the royal capital, where a young prince named Alexander once walked these very stones, dreaming of glory that would surpass even the heroes of Homer. The warm light falls across marble columns that witness the birth of an empire stretching from the shores of the Adriatic to the banks of the Indus River. This is where it all began. What you are about to experience is not a fragment of history, not a glimpse or an overview. This is the complete journey through the rise and fall of Macedonia, from its earliest tribal origins in the rugged highlands of northern Greece to the final echoes of its legacy that still shape our world today. You will walk beside Philip II as he forges scattered clans into the most formidable military machine the ancient world had ever seen. You will march with Alexander across burning deserts and frozen mountain passes, through the gates of Babylon and Persepolis, to the very edge of the known world. We will explore how ordinary people lived under Macedonian rule, from the bustling markets of Alexandria to the remote garrisons of Bactria. You will witness the heartbreak of an empire torn apart by ambitious generals, the Diadochi, who carved Alexander's conquests into rival kingdoms. And you will discover how the fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures created a Hellenistic age whose intellectual achievements laid the foundation for Western civilization itself. This is a story of ambition beyond measure, of a 32-year-old king who died in Babylon having conquered more territory than any human before him. It is a story of what happens when genius meets opportunity, and what remains when both are gone. If you enjoy these complete journeys through ancient civilizations, please subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a lost world, told with the depth and detail these remarkable peoples deserve. Let us begin our journey in the mountain valleys where Macedonia first took shape, where tribal chieftains dreamed of something greater than survival, and where history was waiting to be made. The mountains rise like broken teeth from the earth, their slopes cloaked in oak and pine, their peaks vanishing into clouds that roll down from the Balkans. This is the land that would birth an empire, though for centuries it remains a place the southern Greeks regard with suspicion and contempt. Macedonia, a name that means nothing to the marble cities of Athens and Corinth, nothing to the philosophers debating in sunlit agoras. Here, in these highland valleys where wolves still howl and rivers carve deep gorges through ancient stone, a different kind of Greek civilization takes root. The Argead dynasty emerges from legend and shadow sometime around 700 years before the Common Era. Their origin story speaks of Temenus, a descendant of Heracles himself, whose bloodline supposedly fled the Peloponnese to establish dominion over these northern tribes. Whether myth or memory, the claim matters. It binds Macedonia to the heroic age, to the great cycles of Greek mythology, even as southern city-states dismiss Macedonians as barely civilized. The early Argeads rule not a unified kingdom, but a patchwork of competing clans. Upper Macedonia remains a realm of semi-independent princes, highland lords, who acknowledge the king at Aigai only when it suits them. The lowland plains around the Thermaic Gulf offer richer soil and easier governance, but even here power depends on personal loyalty rather than institutional strength. A Macedonian king leads warriors in battle, dispenses justice beneath sacred oaks, and maintains his throne only so long as he commands respect. Aigai itself, nestled against the Pierian foothills, serves as the spiritual heart of this rough kingdom. Royal tombs burrow into the earth here, their chambers painted with scenes of hunting and warfare, their treasures speaking of connections to the wider Mediterranean world. Gold diadems, silver vessels, weapons of bronze and iron accumulate in darkness beneath the soil. The dead kings rest surrounded by the symbols of their power, waiting through centuries for discovery. The relationship with southern Greece remains complicated. Macedonian kings seek recognition, invite Greek artists and poets to their courts, compete in the Olympic Games to prove their Hellenic credentials. Yet, the great city-states see only a backward monarchy, a land of shepherds and horse breeders who speak a dialect barely comprehensible to Athenian ears. The Persians, when they march through in 480 before the Common Era, find Macedonia a useful vassal. The Greeks remember this collaboration with bitterness. Generations pass. Kings rise and fall, some murdered by rivals, others dying in the endless border wars against Illyrians to the west and Thracians to the east. The kingdom contracts and expands like a breathing thing, never quite achieving stability, never quite collapsing entirely. By the middle of the 4th century before the Common Era, Macedonia appears destined for permanent obscurity, a footnote in the histories of greater powers. Then everything changes. A young prince named Philip, third son of a murdered king, returns from years as a hostage in Thebes. He has watched the greatest military innovators of his age, studied their tactics, absorbed their discipline. In 359 before the Common Era, with the kingdom shattered by invasion and succession crisis, Philip seizes the throne. The mountain kingdom stands at the threshold of transformation. The palace at Pella awakens to a kingdom in ruins. Philip II inherits not an empire, but a catastrophe. 4,000 Macedonian soldiers lie dead on the battlefield of Methone, slaughtered by Illyrian invaders who now occupy the western highlands. Paeonians raid from the north with impunity. Two rival claimants to the throne gather foreign support, each backed by powers eager to install a puppet king. The treasury stands empty. The army, demoralized and depleted, lacks the strength to defend its own borders. Philip is 23 years old. He has spent 3 formative years as a hostage in Thebes, living in the household of Epaminondas, the greatest military mind of the age. There he witnessed the oblique order that shattered Spartan invincibility at Leuctra. He studied how the sacred band fought as an elite shock force. He absorbed lessons in diplomacy, in the careful management of alliances, in the patient construction of power. Now those lessons must be applied with desperate speed. The young king moves with calculated precision. Gold flows to Paeonian chieftains, purchasing temporary peace on the northern frontier. Diplomatic missions carry bribes and promises to the powers backing rival claimants, buying time through negotiation rather than battle. Philip understands that Macedonia cannot fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Each threat must be neutralized in sequence. Within the forges of Pella, something revolutionary takes shape. Macedonian smiths hammer bronze and iron into weapons unlike any the Greek world has known. The sarissa emerges from these workshops, a pike of extraordinary length, stretching 18 feet from counterweight to leaf-shaped blade. Traditional hoplite spears measure 8 feet at most. The sarissa transforms infantry combat, projecting killing power far beyond the reach of any opponent. Training grounds outside the capital witness the birth of a new military system. Philip drills his infantry relentlessly, teaching them to wield the unwieldy sarissa in coordinated formation. The phalanx becomes a forest of iron points, 5 ranks of spearheads projecting forward simultaneously. No enemy can close to striking distance without first penetrating this hedge of death. The formation requires extraordinary discipline, endless practice, absolute trust between soldiers who must move as a single organism. The companion cavalry undergoes parallel transformation. These aristocratic horsemen have always formed Macedonia's elite, but Philip reshapes them into a decisive striking force. They train in wedge formation, designed to punch through enemy lines at the critical moment. The infantry pins opponents in place while cavalry delivers the killing blow. Combined arms warfare, coordinated between foot and horse, becomes Macedonia's signature tactical innovation. Philip tests his reformed army against the Paeonians first, crushing them in a swift campaign that secures the northern border. Then he turns west toward the Illyrians, who have humiliated Macedonia for generations. At a battle whose exact location history has lost, the new phalanx proves its worth. Illyrian warriors, accustomed to overwhelming Macedonian infantry, impale themselves on the sarissa wall. 7,000 fall. The western frontier stabilizes for the first time in living memory. The king's ambitions extend beyond mere survival. In 357 before the Common Era, Philip captures the gold mines of Mount Pangaion, securing annual revenues of 1,000 talents. This wealth finances continuous military expansion. Professional soldiers who train year-round rather than seasonal levies who return to their farms. Macedonia transforms from a kingdom of part-time warriors into a state organized entirely for war. Pella itself reflects the new order. The palace complex expands, its columned halls hosting diplomats from across the Greek world. Philip proves as skilled in negotiation as in battle, weaving alliances through marriage, bribery, and carefully calibrated threats. He takes multiple wives from neighboring royal houses, binding potential enemies through kinship. A son arrives in 356, born to Olympias of Epirus. They name him Alexander. The mountain kingdom that seemed destined for obscurity now stands poised for conquest. Philip has forged the instrument. The question becomes how far that instrument will reach. The training grounds outside Pella echo with the rhythm of transformation. Dust rises in golden clouds as thousands of men drill in formations never before seen in the Greek world. The year is 355 before the Common Era, and Philip's military revolution enters its decisive phase. The sarissa defines this new warfare. Measuring 18 feet in length, nearly twice the reach of traditional Greek spears, these weapons require both hands to wield. Cornel wood forms the shaft, carefully selected for its density and flexibility. Iron points cap both ends, the rear spike serving as counterweight and backup weapon should the primary head shatter. A single soldier carrying this pike cannot defend himself with a shield in the traditional manner. He depends entirely on the men beside him. This dependency becomes doctrine. The Macedonian phalanx operates as a single organism rather than a collection of individual warriors. Soldiers train for months to maintain formation while advancing, their sarissas projecting forward in staggered rows. The first 5 ranks present their weapons simultaneously, creating an impenetrable hedge of iron points. Enemies face not one spear, but dozens, each seeking flesh before any sword can close the distance. The shield shrinks accordingly, where hoplites carry the heavy aspis on their left arms. Macedonian infantry wear smaller peltae suspended from neck straps. This frees both hands for the sarissa while still providing protection against missiles. Armor lightens as well. Bronze cuirasses give way to linen composite, layered fabric stiffened with glue that stops arrows while allowing greater mobility. Philip understands that infantry alone cannot win decisive battles. The companion cavalry emerges as his hammer to the phalanx's anvil. These aristocratic horsemen ride larger mounts bred in the Macedonian highlands, animals capable of carrying armored riders into sustained combat. Their wedge formations, borrowed from Thracian and Scythian tactics, concentrate striking power at a single point. The xyston becomes their signature weapon. This cavalry lance extends 12 feet, allowing riders to strike infantry before foot soldiers can respond. Companions train to charge in tight formation, breaking enemy lines through shock rather than prolonged melee. Once the charge creates chaos, shorter swords finish the work. Siege warfare receives equal attention. Philip recruits engineers from Syracuse, the Mediterranean's leading innovators in military technology. Torsion catapults appear in Macedonian arsenals, machines capable of hurling stones and bolts with unprecedented force. Mobile siege towers rise on training fields, their construction techniques refined through constant experimentation. Battering rams grow larger, their crews protected by wheeled sheds covered in wet hides. The integration of these elements marks Philip's true genius. Infantry pins enemies in place. Cavalry strikes flanks and rear. Siege engines reduce fortifications. Light troops screen movements and pursue the broken. Each component supports the others in coordinated operations that Greek city-states, with their citizen militias and limited campaigning seasons, cannot match. Professional officers emerge from this system. Men who once led through birth alone now prove themselves through demonstrated competence. Philip promotes based on ability, creating a meritocratic command structure that rewards innovation. These officers will later serve his son across 3 continents. The treasury funds this transformation. Gold from captured Thracian mines flows into Pella, financing year-round training and equipment production. Smiths hammer bronze into helmets bearing distinctive cheek guards. Leather workers stitch sandals designed for long marches. The entire kingdom reorganizes around military production. By 346 before the Common Era, Macedonia fields the most sophisticated army in the Mediterranean world. 40,000 trained soldiers stand ready, their equipment standardized, their tactics rehearsed, their loyalty secured through regular pay and promises of plunder. The instrument Philip has forged awaits only direction. Greece lies to the south, wealthy and divided, its city-states exhausted by generations of internecine warfare. The sacred war offers opportunity. The sacred war beckons like an open door. For nearly a decade, conflict has ravaged central Greece over control of Delphi, the holiest sanctuary in the Hellenic world. Phocian generals have seized the temple treasury, melting down golden offerings to pay mercenary armies. The great powers of Greece, Thebes, Athens, Sparta, have exhausted themselves in shifting alliances and inconclusive campaigns. Into this chaos steps Philip, invited by Thessalian allies desperate for aid against Phocian aggression. The Macedonian army descends through mountain passes in 346 before the Common Era, not as conquerors, but as liberators of Apollo's shrine. Philip understands the power of religious legitimacy. His soldiers march under the banner of sacred vengeance, defenders of divine honor against temple robbers. Thessaly falls into his orbit, its famed cavalry joining Macedonian ranks. The fertile plains stretching toward Thermopylae now answer to Pella. Athens watches with growing alarm. Demosthenes thunders in the assembly, warning of the northern wolf circling Greek liberty. His Philippics become legendary denunciations, painting the Macedonian king as a barbarian tyrant threatening civilization itself. Yet Athenian warnings cannot forge Athenian unity. The city-states remain fractured, each pursuing narrow interests while Philip methodically expands his influence. The years between 346 and 338 witness Philip's patient diplomacy. He cultivates allies, exploits rivalries, offers generous terms to those who submit. Thracian campaigns secure his eastern flank. Chalcidice falls, its proud cities absorbed into Macedonian territory. Gold continues flowing from Pangaean mines, financing an ever larger military establishment. Philip builds roads connecting his conquests, enabling rapid troop movements across terrain that once fragmented power. Thebes finally recognizes the threat too late. The city that destroyed Spartan hegemony at Leuctra now faces a more dangerous adversary. Athenian envoys arrive seeking alliance against the common enemy. Ancient rivals embrace in desperate partnership, their combined forces representing the last hope of Greek independence. The armies converge near Chaeronea in Boeotia during the summer of 338 before the Common Era. Philip commands perhaps 30,000 soldiers. The allied Greeks field comparable numbers, their hoplites veterans of countless campaigns. The Theban sacred band anchors one flank, 300 paired warriors who have never known defeat, bound by oaths and love to fight unto death. Dawn breaks over the Cephissus River valley. Dust rises as phalanxes advance across the plain. Philip commands the Macedonian right, facing Athenian citizen soldiers. His 18-year-old son, Alexander, leads the companion cavalry on the left, opposite the sacred band. The Sarissa-armed phalanx forms the center, its bristling spears creating an impenetrable hedge of iron. Philip executes a calculated withdrawal, drawing the eager Athenians forward. Their line stretches, gaps appearing between units. The moment arrives. Macedonian trumpets sound the advance. The phalanx surges forward, sarissas leveled, crashing into the disordered Athenian ranks. Panic spreads through citizen soldiers unaccustomed to such coordinated violence. On the opposite flank, Alexander charges. The companion cavalry strikes the sacred band with terrible force. The Thebans hold their ground, fighting in pairs as they have trained, but cavalry and phalanx press from multiple directions. One by one, the sacred warriors fall. When the battle ends, all 300 lie dead where they stood, their bodies later honored with a marble lion that still guards their grave. The allied army shatters. Thousands die in the rout. Athens braces for siege, but Philip offers unexpected mercy. He returns Athenian prisoners without ransom, sends his son to escort the ashes of the fallen home. The gesture reveals calculated statesmanship. Philip seeks Greek cooperation, not Greek destruction. At Corinth in 337, delegates from across Greece gather to formalize new realities. The League of Corinth emerges, binding the city-states in permanent alliance under Macedonian leadership. Philip assumes the title of hegemon, commander of combined Greek forces. The League's declared purpose: war against Persia, vengeance for Xerxes' invasion 150 years past. The diplomatic halls of Corinth witnessed the death of Greek independence and the birth of Macedonian hegemony. City-states retain nominal autonomy, but surrender foreign policy to Pella. Garrisons occupy strategic points. The fractured world of competing polias yields to unified command. Philip has achieved through war and diplomacy what no Greek had managed: the unification of Hellas under single authority. The instrument forged in Macedonian training grounds has conquered its creators. The gardens of Mieza unfold in terraced splendor 3 years after Charonea's blood has dried. Here, among colonnaded walkways shaded by plane trees, a different kind of conquest takes shape. Aristotle of Stagira has accepted Philip's invitation to tutor the crown prince, and the philosopher transforms this rural estate into an academy where the future conqueror's mind will be forged with the same precision his father applied to the Phalanx. Alexander arrives at 13, already marked by destiny's peculiar signs. His eyes hold different colors, one dark as Macedonian earth, one pale as Aegean sky. His hair flames copper gold in sunlight. The boy moves with restless energy, questioning everything, challenging tutors who cannot match his hunger for knowledge. Philip recognizes something dangerous and magnificent in this son, something requiring careful cultivation. The curriculum Aristotle designs spans the breadth of Greek learning. Morning sessions explore natural philosophy, the classification of animals, the movement of celestial bodies, the composition of matter. Afternoon discussions turn to ethics, politics, the nature of justice, and the ideal state. Evening readings immerse the prince in poetry, particularly Homer's verses, which Alexander will carry into battle like sacred talismans. The Iliad becomes his constant companion, a copy annotated by Aristotle himself, sleeping beneath his pillow throughout campaigns yet to come. The philosopher teaches more than facts. He instills methods of inquiry, habits of systematic observation, frameworks for understanding the world's complexity. Alexander learns to see patterns where others perceive chaos, to analyze problems with surgical precision, to synthesize knowledge from disparate sources into unified understanding. These intellectual tools will prove as valuable as any siege engine. Fellow students share these gardens: Hephaestion, Ptolemy, Nearchus, Cassander, young nobles who will become Alexander's generals, his companions in conquest, eventually his successors in fragmenting the empire they helped create. Bonds forged in philosophical debate and athletic competition will endure through desert marches and mountain sieges. Hephaestion emerges as Alexander's closest friend, a relationship of such intensity that ancient sources struggle to categorize it. Physical training parallels intellectual development. Alexander masters horsemanship, taming the legendary Bucephalos when experienced riders fail. The horse, terrified of its own shadow, yields to a boy who simply turns its head toward the sun. Philip watches this display and reportedly declares that Macedonia is too small for such a spirit. Wrestling, hunting, weapons drill, the prince excels at everything requiring courage and quick thinking. Yet shadows gather even in these sunlit gardens. Olympias, Alexander's mother, fills her son's imagination with divine ancestry. She claims descent from Achilles through her Epirate lineage, whispers that Zeus himself fathered Alexander during a thunderstorm visitation. These stories plant seeds of grandiosity that will flower into claims of godhood. The tension between Philip's earthly ambitions and Olympias's divine pretensions creates psychological fault lines in the young prince. Philip's new marriage to a Macedonian noblewoman named Cleopatra Eurydice fractures the royal family. At the wedding feast, the bride's uncle prays publicly for a legitimate heir, implying Alexander's half-Epirot blood renders him unsuitable for succession. Alexander hurls his cup at the man. Philip draws his sword against his own son, but stumbles drunkenly. The prince flees with Olympias into exile, their relationship with the king poisoned by succession anxiety. Reconciliation comes, but trust never fully returns. Philip repairs his Persian campaign, while Alexander watches from the margins, uncertain of his place in the grand design. The king arranges his daughter's marriage at Aegae, the ancient capital, planning celebrations that will display Macedonian power to assembled Greek dignitaries. The theater at Aegae fills with morning light as Philip enters without bodyguards, demonstrating confidence in his united kingdom. A young nobleman named Pausanias approaches with concealed blade. The assassination unfolds in moments, steel flashing, the king falling, the killer fleeing toward waiting horses. Alexander's companions cut down Pausanias before he escapes, silencing forever whatever secrets motivated the murder. Conspiracy theories multiply immediately. Olympias benefits from her estranged husband's death. Alexander gains the throne he feared losing. Persian gold may have purchased the assassin. The truth dissolves into competing narratives, but the result remains clear. At 20 years old, Alexander inherits a kingdom, an army, and a war against the greatest empire on earth. The Hellespont narrows to a ribbon of churning water where two continents nearly touch. Spring winds carry the salt spray across the strait as 37,000 soldiers prepare to cross from Europe into Asia. The young king stands at the prow of his flagship, armor gleaming beneath the morning sun, steering toward the Trojan shore where Achilles once walked. This is no mere military crossing, but a sacred pilgrimage, a deliberate echo of mythic war. The fleet numbers 160 vessels, their oars cutting through waters that have witnessed Persian invasions flowing the opposite direction. Xerxes crossed here with millions, or so the Greeks claimed. Now, Alexander reverses that tide with an army smaller than a single Persian satrapy could muster. The audacity borders on madness. The Persian Empire stretches from Egypt to India, commanding resources beyond calculation. Macedonia commits everything to this gamble. Alexander's spear flies through the air and embeds itself in Asian soil. He leaps ashore in full armor, claiming the continent as territory won by conquest. The gesture carries profound meaning for soldiers raised on Homeric tales. Their king declares himself the new Achilles, come to finish what the Greeks began at Troy 1,000 years before. The army marches south along the coast, passing through landscapes haunted by legend. At Ilium, Alexander sacrifices at the temple of Athena and honors the tomb of Achilles with offerings and athletic games. He takes from the temple a shield said to date from the Trojan War, carrying it into battle as a talisman connecting present conquest to ancient glory. Persian satraps gather their forces at the Granicus River, choosing ground that favors defense. The waterway runs swift and cold with spring snowmelt, its banks steep and muddy. Cavalry cannot charge uphill through such terrain. Infantry would struggle to maintain formation while climbing slippery slopes under arrow fire. The Persians positioned themselves perfectly, their Greek mercenary infantry held in reserve while noble cavalry crowds the riverbank. Alexander's generals counsel caution. Wait for dawn. Find a better crossing. Let the enemy make the first mistake. The young king dismisses such advice. Delay grants the Persians time to concentrate greater forces. Hesitation suggests fear. The army crosses now. The Macedonian cavalry plunges into the river in late afternoon light. Water splashes golden as horses struggle against the current. Persian javelins rain down on the struggling horsemen. The riverbank becomes a killing ground where geography favors the defenders absolutely. Alexander leads the companion cavalry directly into the thickest fighting. His white-plumed helmet marks him for every Persian noble seeking glory through regicide. A sword blow shatters the crest. A Persian commander raises his blade for the killing stroke. Clitus the Black, a veteran officer, severs the attacker's arm before the blow lands. The king survives by the margin of a single heartbeat. The Macedonian cavalry gains the far bank through sheer ferocity. Persian nobles fall in clusters around the king, their courage no match for Macedonian discipline and desperation. The satrap's cavalry breaks and flees, abandoning the Greek mercenaries who formed their infantry reserve. Those mercenaries, perhaps 6,000 strong, request terms of surrender. Alexander refuses. These Greeks chose Persian gold over Hellenic solidarity. They represent everything the invasion claims to oppose. The Phalanx advances with sarissas leveled. The massacre continues until barely 2,000 survive for transport to Macedonian mines as slave laborers. The victory opens Asia Minor like a cracked shell. City after city welcomes the liberator who promises freedom from Persian tribute. Sardis surrenders its treasury without resistance. Ephesus expels its Persian garrison before Alexander arrives. The Ionian Greeks, subjects of Persia for 2 centuries, embrace their deliverer with genuine enthusiasm. Alexander moves methodically down the coast, eliminating Persian naval bases that could threaten his supply lines. The strategy reveals sophisticated understanding of logistics. Persia commands the sea with Phoenician and Egyptian fleets. Macedonia possesses no navy capable of challenging that dominance. By capturing every port, Alexander neutralizes Persian naval superiority without fighting a single sea battle. The campaign season of 334 before Christ ends with Persian power shattered in western Anatolia. The great king Darius III watches from distant Babylon as his western provinces fall like autumn leaves. The invasion that seemed suicidal folly has become an existential threat to the oldest empire on earth. Winter descends upon Anatolia as the Macedonian army pushes inland from the conquered coast. The landscape transforms from Mediterranean shores to the high central plateau, where ancient kingdoms once rose and fell before Greek memory began. Snow dusts the mountain passes as Alexander leads his forces toward the heart of Phrygia, following roads carved by Persian engineers through terrain that has witnessed the march of empires for millennia. The city of Gordium emerges from the winter landscape like a ghost of vanished glory. Once the capital of the Phrygian kingdom, this ancient settlement guards the crossing where east meets west, where trade routes from the Aegean intersect with caravan paths stretching toward Mesopotamia. The Acropolis rises above the Sangarius River, its weathered stones bearing witness to 7 centuries of accumulated legend. Here, according to tradition, the peasant Gordius arrived in an ox cart to fulfill an oracle's prophecy and become king. Here his son Midas ruled, the legendary monarch whose touch transformed all to gold. The Macedonian army enters Gordium in early spring of 333 before Christ, establishing winter quarters while awaiting reinforcements from home. The pause allows exhausted soldiers to recover from months of continuous campaigning. Fresh troops arrive from Macedonia, young men eager to join the great adventure. their numbers replenishing losses from battle and garrison duty. Within the ancient citadel stands a temple dedicated to Zeus the king. Inside rests the wagon that carried Gordius to his destiny, its yoke bound to a pole by an intricate knot of cornel bark. The fibers have hardened over centuries into a mass of intertwined complexity, the ends hidden within the tangle. Local tradition holds that whoever loosens this knot will rule all Asia. Previous visitors have examined the puzzle, traced its convolutions, attempted to find the hidden ends. All have failed. Alexander approaches the wagon with the confidence that has characterized his entire campaign. The knot presents itself as an intellectual challenge, a puzzle demanding solution. The young king studies the ancient binding, considers its construction, recognizes the impossibility of conventional untying. Then, according to the account that would echo through centuries, he draws his sword and severs the knot with a single stroke. The act transcends mere impatience. It declares a new approach to ancient problems, a willingness to cut through accumulated tradition rather than submit to its constraints. Whether the prophecy required untying or merely loosing matters little, the knot lies severed. The claim to Asian dominion stands proclaimed. Spring thaw opens the mountain passes as the army resumes its march. The route leads southeast through the Cilician Gates, a narrow defile cutting through the Taurus Mountains. These towering peaks form a natural barrier separating the Anatolian plateau from the fertile plains of Syria. Persian defenders could hold this passage against any force, yet they abandon their positions as the Macedonians approach. The gates swing open to the conqueror. Beyond the mountains lies Cilicia, a wealthy province where Greek cities dot the coastal plain. The city of Tarsus falls without resistance, its population welcoming liberation from Persian tribute. Here Alexander nearly dies, not from enemy action but from his own recklessness. Overheated from the march, he plunges into the icy waters of the Cydnus River. Fever seizes him within hours, a violent illness that leaves him bedridden for weeks while his army waits anxiously. Physicians debate treatments while rumors spread through the camp. The great king Darius, finally roused to action, gathers an enormous army in Syria. Time favors the Persians, as each day of Macedonian delay allows more troops to assemble. Yet Alexander recovers, his constitution proving as formidable as his ambition. By autumn, the army moves again, pressing toward the Syrian gates and the confrontation that will determine the fate of empires. The Syrian gates open onto a narrow coastal plain where mountains plunge toward the sea. November winds sweep across the battlefield as two armies converge near the Pinarus River, a modest stream that will soon run red with the blood of nations. The great king Darius III has chosen this ground, believing the confined terrain will neutralize Macedonian cavalry superiority. He commands perhaps 100,000 men, though ancient sources inflate this number to impossible heights. Alexander leads roughly 40,000 veterans, hardened by 2 years of continuous campaigning. The Persian position stretches across the plain, anchored by mountains on the right and sea on the left. Darius stations himself at the center with his royal guard, the 10,000 immortals whose golden apple-tipped spears have enforced Persian will for generations. Greek mercenaries, perhaps 30,000 strong, form the infantry corps. These men know Macedonian tactics intimately, having trained in the same traditions. They represent the most dangerous element of the Persian line. Alexander surveys the field from horseback as morning light illuminates the enemy formations. The narrowness of the plain compresses both armies, eliminating the possibility of grand flanking maneuvers. This will be a battle of direct assault, of phalanx against phalanx, of will against will. The young king positions his companion cavalry on the right wing, his Thessalian horsemen on the left. The Sarissa-armed infantry masses in the center, their 18-foot pikes bristling like a forest of bronze-tipped reeds. The Macedonian advance begins at a measured pace, maintaining formation across uneven ground. Persian archers loose volleys that darken the autumn sky, arrows clattering against raised shields. The phalanx absorbs casualties without breaking stride, closing the distance with mechanical precision. At 300 paces, Alexander signals the charge. The companion cavalry explodes forward in a thundering wedge aimed directly at the Persian left flank. Alexander rides at the apex, his white-plumed helmet marking him for friend and enemy alike. The impact shatters the Persian cavalry screen, scattering horsemen who cannot match the disciplined Macedonian charge. Within minutes, Alexander's cavalry has carved through to threaten the Persian center itself. The infantry engagement proves more desperate. Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia clash with Macedonian phalangites in brutal close combat. The sarissa loses effectiveness at such intimate range, and swords replace pikes as men grapple in the dust. Casualties mount on both sides as the center grinds forward in bloody stalemate. Darius watches from his ornate chariot as the Macedonian cavalry wheels toward his position. Royal guardsmen form a protective screen, but panic spreads through the Persian ranks as Alexander's horsemen cut ever closer to the great king himself. The moment of decision arrives. Darius turns his chariot and flees, abandoning his army, his treasure, and his family to the conqueror. The Persian collapse follows their king's flight. Units that had fought with determination moments before dissolve into fleeing mobs. The Macedonian pursuit continues until darkness halts the slaughter. Tens of thousands of Persian soldiers die in the rout, cut down as they flee through mountain passes or drown attempting to cross rivers. The royal tent awaits Alexander that evening, its purple hangings and golden furnishings intact. Within, he finds the family Darius abandoned, the queen mother Sisygambes, the queen Statera, daughters and attendants. Alexander treats them with elaborate courtesy, assuring their safety and maintaining their royal dignity. This gesture resonates across the Persian Empire, demonstrating that the Macedonian conqueror offers mercy alongside military dominance. The treasure captured at Issus staggers imagination. Gold, silver, precious gems, and royal regalia fall into Macedonian hands. Yet the true prize remains elusive. Darius lives, gathering forces for another confrontation. The road to final victory leads south through Phoenicia and Egypt, before the ultimate reckoning in the Persian heartland. The Phoenician coast stretches southward from Issus, a ribbon of ancient trading cities clinging to the narrow strip between mountains and sea. Alexander's army descends through Syria in the winter months, following the great victory, receiving the surrender of one wealthy port after another. Aradus, Byblos, Sidon, each opens its gates to the conqueror who has shattered Persian power. The Phoenician fleet, backbone of Persian naval supremacy, begins defecting to the Macedonian cause. Yet one city refuses submission. Tyre rises from the sea itself, an island fortress separated from the mainland by half a mile of churning water. The oldest and proudest of Phoenician cities, Tyre has never fallen to a land-based army. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon besieged it for 13 years without success. The Tyrians trust their walls, their fleet, their island sanctuary. When Alexander requests permission to sacrifice at the temple of Melkart, the Tyrian Heracles, the city's elders refuse. They offer neutrality, not submission. Alexander understands the insult and the strategic reality. An unconquered Tyre threatens his supply lines and leaves Persian naval power intact. The siege begins in January of 332 before Christ. Alexander conceives a plan that transforms geography itself. If the sea protects Tyre, he will eliminate the sea. Engineers begin constructing a causeway from the mainland toward the island, a mole of stone and timber stretching across the strait. Thousands of laborers demolish old Tyre on the shore, using its ruins as building material. Cedar logs from Lebanese mountains form the foundation, rubble and earth packing the gaps. The work proceeds under constant harassment. Tyrian warships patrol the construction zone, raining arrows and fire upon exposed workers. The defenders deploy a converted horse transport filled with combustible materials, ramming it against the siege towers protecting the causeway's end. Flames consume months of labor in hours. Alexander orders the mole widened, new towers constructed, the work resumed with grim determination. Spring brings reinforcement. The defecting Phoenician fleets arrive, ships from Sidon, Byblos, Eridu joining the Macedonian cause. Cyprus contributes over 100 vessels. Suddenly Alexander commands naval superiority. The Tyrian fleet retreats behind harbor booms, trapped within their own defenses. The siege transforms from land assault to combined operation. The causeway creeps forward through summer heat. Tyrian divers cut anchor cables of Macedonian ships. Defenders drop massive stones into the shallows, blocking approach. They heat sand in bronze shields until it glows, pouring it upon attackers scaling the walls. The grains penetrate armor joints, burning flesh beneath. Every innovation meets counter-innovation in a deadly contest of engineering and endurance. Siege towers rise to unprecedented heights, their platforms level with Tyre's battlements. Battering rams mounted on ships pound the seaward walls. The Macedonians discover that the southern wall, facing open water, stands weakest. Naval rams create breaches that infantry cannot exploit against determined defenders. The stalemate stretches through months of Mediterranean summer. The breakthrough comes in late summer. A coordinated assault strikes multiple points simultaneously. Ships carrying siege towers approach the breached southern wall, while diversionary attacks occupy defenders elsewhere. Macedonian soldiers pour through the gap, fighting street by street through a city that refuses surrender. The battle becomes massacre as resistance collapses into desperate last stands. Tyre falls after 7 months of siege. The human cost staggers. 8,000 Tyrians dead in the final assault, 30,000 sold into slavery. Alexander crucifies 2,000 military-age men along the beach as warning to other cities contemplating resistance. The severity reflects both strategic calculation and personal fury at prolonged defiance. The causeway Alexander built still exists, accumulated sand transforming the island into a peninsula over subsequent millennia. Tyre's fall eliminates the last obstacle between Alexander and Egypt. The Persian fleet ceases to exist as a fighting force. The eastern Mediterranean becomes a Macedonian lake, supply lines secured for campaigns deeper into Asia. The siege demonstrates that no fortress, however impregnable its reputation, can withstand Macedonian determination and engineering genius combined with overwhelming resources and ruthless persistence. The road south from Tyre follows the ancient coastal highway through lands that have known conquerors for millennia. Gaza alone resists, its fortress commander refusing surrender despite Tyre's example. 2 months of siege reduce the city, its defender dragged behind Alexander's chariot in deliberate echo of Achilles' treatment of Hector. The path to Egypt lies open. The Macedonian army crosses the Sinai in 7 days, emerging from desert wastes into the green abundance of the Nile Delta. Egypt has chafed under Persian rule for 2 centuries, its temples desecrated, its traditions suppressed, its people taxed into resentment. The satrap Mazaces commands no army capable of resistance. He surrenders without battle, handing Alexander the oldest civilization on earth. Memphis receives the conqueror as liberator. The ancient capital's priests crown Alexander pharaoh according to rituals unchanged for 3,000 years. He becomes the living Horus, son of Ra, legitimate ruler in the eyes of Egyptian theology. The Macedonian king who traces his ancestry to Heracles now adds divine Egyptian lineage to his growing collection of sacred identities. He sacrifices to Apis, the sacred bull, reversing Persian contempt for Egyptian religion. Temples receive endowments, priests regain privileges stripped by foreign overlords. Yet Memphis cannot hold Alexander long. Something draws him westward across the desert toward the oasis of Siwa, where the oracle of Ammon has spoken truth to seekers for centuries. The Greeks identify Ammon with Zeus, father of gods and men. The journey requires crossing 300 miles of waterless waste where entire armies have perished. The expedition departs in winter when desert heat relents. Guides lose their way in sandstorms that erase all landmarks. Ancient sources speak of crows appearing to lead the lost column, of miraculous rains saving men dying of thirst. Whatever the truth, Alexander reaches Siwa alive. The oracle's priests receive him within the temple's innermost sanctuary. What passes between Alexander and the god remains forever secret. He emerges transformed, speaking of divine parentage, of destiny confirmed. Later accounts claim the priest addressed him as son of Ammon, whether by design or linguistic accident. Alexander never reveals the questions he asked or the answers he received. He carries Siwa's secrets to his grave. The return journey brings Alexander to the western edge of the Nile Delta, where a limestone ridge separates Lake Mareotis from the Mediterranean. A small Egyptian fishing village called Rakotis occupies the site. Alexander sees something his engineers initially miss: the perfect harbor. The location offers everything a great port requires. The island of Pharos breaks the Mediterranean swells, creating sheltered anchorage. Fresh water flows from Lake Mareotis. The limestone ridge provides building foundation. 2 harbors can serve different winds. The site connects Egypt's agricultural wealth to Mediterranean trade routes while remaining defensible against land attack. Alexander personally traces the city's outline, using barley grain when chalk runs short. Birds descend to eat the grain, initially alarming the superstitious until seers interpret the omen favorably. The city will feed multitudes. The grid pattern follows Hippodamian principles: streets intersecting at right angles, blocks allocated for temples, markets, palaces, and residential quarters. The architect Dinocrates receives commission to build what will become the ancient world's greatest city. Alexander will never see its completion. He departs Egypt in spring of 331 before the Common Era, marching toward final confrontation with Darius. Behind him, construction begins on Alexandria. the city that will bear his name for over 2,000 years. Egypt provides more than symbolic legitimacy. Its grain feeds armies, its gold finances campaigns. Its strategic position secures the Mediterranean flank while Alexander pushes east. The Persian Empire's richest satrapy has changed hands without significant battle, its resources now fueling Macedonian ambitions. The army reassembles at Memphis, reinforced by fresh troops from Greece. Spring brings marching weather. The road leads northeast through Palestine, across the Euphrates, toward Mesopotamia's heart. Darius has spent the winter raising the largest army the Persian Empire can muster. Somewhere beyond the rivers, the great king waits with forces numbering in hundreds of thousands. The decisive battle approaches. The Macedonian army crosses the Euphrates at Thapsacus in late summer, finding the fords undefended. Darius has chosen his ground carefully, withdrawing deep into Mesopotamia, where the flat plains favor his numerical superiority. The great king commands perhaps 200,000 soldiers, drawn from every corner of his vast empire. Scythe chariots stand ready to shatter phalanx formations. War elephants from India tower above infantry lines. Cavalry from Bactria, Persia, and the steppes mass in numbers that dwarf Alexander's mounted forces. The Macedonians number roughly 47,000. They have marched over 3,000 miles from home, fought through Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt. Now they advance toward the heartland of an empire that has dominated the ancient world for 2 centuries. Scouts report the Persian position near the village of Gaugamela. On plains the great king has ordered leveled and smoothed for chariot charges. The battlefield stretches wide and open beneath the autumn sky, every advantage seemingly favoring the defenders. Alexander rests his army, studies the terrain, and refuses counsel to attack by night. Victory must come in daylight, witnessed by both armies, leaving no doubt about its completeness. Dawn on the 1st of October, 331 years before the Common Era, reveals the Persian host arrayed across a front stretching miles. The sight would paralyze lesser commanders. Alexander rides before his men on Bucephalus, positioning units with precise calculation. The Macedonian line angles obliquely, refusing the left, while the right advances. Companion cavalry masses on the extreme right flank, poised for the decisive stroke. The battle opens with Persian chariots thundering forward, scythes spinning. Macedonian light troops open lanes, letting the vehicles pass harmlessly through gaps before cutting down drivers from behind. The phalanx advances in echelon, sarissas leveled, bronze points catching morning light. Persian arrows darken the sky, but the advance continues. Alexander leads the companions in a sweeping movement toward the right, drawing Persian cavalry to counter. The maneuver stretches the enemy line, creating gaps in the center. When the opening appears, Alexander wheels inward, driving directly toward the Persian command position. The wedge formation cuts through lighter troops like a blade through cloth. Darius watches the Macedonian cavalry approaching his position with terrifying speed. The same fear that gripped him at Issus returns. Before Alexander can close the distance, the great king turns his chariot and flees eastward. Persian commanders see their king abandoning the field. The center begins to waver. On the Macedonian left, Parmenion's forces face desperate pressure. Persian and Indian cavalry threaten to overwhelm the flank. Parmenion sends urgent messages requesting support. Alexander must choose between pursuing Darius and saving his left wing. He turns back, leading the companions in a brutal ride across the battlefield to relieve the pressure. By afternoon, the Persian army disintegrates. Units that held firm now scatter across the Mesopotamian plain. Pursuit continues until darkness halts the cavalry. Casualties among the defeated number in tens of thousands. The Macedonians lose perhaps 500 dead, though thousands more carry wounds. Babylon opens its gates without resistance. The ancient city welcomes Alexander as liberator from Persian rule. Priests of Marduk perform rituals of kingship. The treasury yields wealth beyond imagination. Alexander offers sacrifices at the great ziggurat, honoring local gods as he honored Ammon in Egypt. The Ishtar Gate rises in glazed blue brick, lions and dragons parading across its surface. Hanging gardens cascade from terraced walls. Canals thread through streets older than Greek memory. The conqueror enters a city that has seen empires rise and fall for millennia, now adding another name to its long chronicle of masters. Susa falls next, then Persepolis itself, the ceremonial heart of Achaemenid power. The treasury at Persepolis contains 120,000 talents of silver, wealth accumulated over generations of imperial tribute. Alexander holds the resources to fund campaigns for decades. The Persian Empire, dominant power of the ancient world since Cyrus the Great, has effectively ceased to exist. Its king flees eastward with diminishing followers. Its capitals belong to the Macedonian conqueror. Its treasuries finance foreign ambitions. In a single autumn day, on the plains of Gaugamela, the political order of the ancient world transformed forever. The road from Babylon climbs eastward through ancient Mesopotamia toward the Iranian plateau, following routes worn smooth by centuries of royal processions and tribute caravans. Winter settles across the highlands as the Macedonian army advances into the heartland of Persian power, moving through landscapes that have witnessed the passage of Achaemenid kings for 200 years. Susa surrenders without resistance in December of 331 before Christ. The administrative capital of the empire opens its gates to the conqueror, offering treasures accumulated across generations of imperial rule. 40,000 talents of gold and silver bullion fill the treasury vaults, alongside the purple robes and ceremonial regalia of Persian monarchy. Among the captured artifacts rest bronze statues of Harmodius and Aristogeiton, tyrannicides honored in Athens, seized by Xerxes during his invasion a century and a half earlier. Alexander orders their return to Greece, a symbolic reversal of Persian aggression that resonates through the Hellenic world. The army rests briefly before pressing onward toward Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Achaemenid power. The Persian gates, a narrow mountain pass guarding the approach, present the first serious resistance since Gaugamela. Ariobarzanes commands a force of 40,000 infantry holding positions among the rocks. Frontal assault proves costly, the terrain negating Macedonian tactical advantages. Local guides reveal a mountain path around the Persian position, and Alexander leads a flanking force through snow-covered heights in a night march that echoes his father's tactics at Cheronea. The defenders scatter. Persepolis lies open. The city that rises before the Macedonian army represents 2 centuries of imperial magnificence. Darius the Great began construction around 515 before Christ, and successive kings expanded the complex into a monument of unprecedented grandeur. The Apadana, the great audience hall, stands upon a massive stone platform, its cedar roof supported by 72 columns rising to heights of 60 feet. Carved reliefs along the staircases depict delegations from 23 subject nations bearing tribute, an eternal procession frozen in limestone. The treasury of Persepolis exceeds even Susa's wealth. 120,000 talents of precious metal fill storage chambers carved into the mountain behind the palace complex. This single capture provides resources sufficient to fund military operations for decades, transforming Alexander from a king dependent on conquest for survival into the wealthiest ruler the ancient world has known. For 4 months, the Macedonian army occupies Persepolis. Soldiers quarter in royal apartments. Officers feast in halls designed for Persian nobility. The wealth of centuries flows into Macedonian hands, requiring 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels to transport the captured treasure. Then, in May of 330 before Christ, fire consumes the palace complex. Ancient sources offer conflicting accounts. Some describe a deliberate act of vengeance for Xerxes' burning of Athens, a symbolic completion of the Pan-Hellenic crusade. Others attribute the conflagration to a drunken revel, flames spreading from torches thrown by revelers. The Athenian courtesan Thais allegedly urged the destruction, though her role remains disputed. Whatever the cause, the Apadana burns. Cedar beams collapse. Limestone cracks in the heat. Carved reliefs blacken and shatter. The ceremonial heart of Persian monarchy, repository of imperial memory and dynastic legitimacy, transforms into charred ruins within hours. The destruction carries profound symbolic weight. Persepolis served not merely as administrative center, but as sacred space where Persian kings received divine sanction for their rule. Its burning announces the definitive end of Achaemenid authority, a message legible across the empire. No restoration is possible, no return to former glory remains conceivable. Alexander departs the smoking ruins, pursuing Darius eastward. The Persian king flees toward the empire's remote provinces, his authority evaporating with each passing day. Behind him, Persepolis smolders, its magnificent reliefs crumbling into the dust of history. The Achaemenid dynasty, which had ruled from the Aegean to the Indus for over 2 centuries, exists now only in memory and in the scattered remnants of its fleeing king. The pursuit begins before the ashes of Persepolis have cooled. Alexander drives his army northward through the Iranian highlands, following reports of the fleeing Persian king. Darius has abandoned his capitals, his treasury, his family, his dignity. What remains is a desperate flight toward the empire's eastern provinces, where loyal satraps might yet rally forces sufficient to continue resistance. The landscape transforms as the Macedonians advance. Fertile river valleys give way to arid plateaus stretching toward distant mountain ranges. Summer heat beats down mercilessly on men accustomed to Mediterranean climates. The army covers distances that would have seemed impossible months earlier, driven by their king's relentless determination to capture his rival before eastern governors can organize effective opposition. Ecbatana falls without resistance in early summer of 330 before Christ. The ancient Median capital, summer residence of Persian kings, yields its treasures to Macedonian control. Alexander pauses briefly to reorganize his forces, dispatching slower units and accumulated plunder westward under Parmenion's command. The pursuit column that continues eastward consists of the fastest, most mobile elements of the army. Intelligence reaches Alexander that Darius travels with a diminishing retinue of Persian nobles. The great king's authority crumbles with each passing day. Satraps who once prostrated themselves before the King of Kings now calculate their own survival. The empire's eastern provinces watch and wait, measuring the approaching Macedonian against the fleeing Persian. The pursuit accelerates through the Caspian Gates, a narrow mountain pass that has guarded Persia's eastern approaches for centuries. Alexander pushes his cavalry forward at punishing speed, leaving infantry struggling to follow. Horses collapse from exhaustion. Men march through nights without rest. The distance between hunter and quarry shrinks steadily. Near Hecatompylos, devastating news arrives. Bessus, satrap of Bactria, has seized Darius and declared himself the new great king. The Persian nobles accompanying their monarch have turned against him, binding their sovereign in golden chains as they flee eastward. The legitimate Achaemenid ruler has become a prisoner of his own subjects. Alexander redoubles his pursuit, understanding that Bessus cannot be permitted to establish himself as a rallying point for Persian resistance. The Macedonian king rides through the night with a small cavalry detachment, abandoning even his elite companions who cannot maintain the pace. By dawn, the pursuers have covered distances that seem impossible. The discovery comes in a remote stretch of the eastern plateau. A wagon stands abandoned beside the road, its oxen slaughtered. Inside lies Darius III, last legitimate king of the Achaemenid dynasty, mortally wounded by his captors' javelins. Bessus and his co-conspirators have fled eastward, unwilling to surrender their prisoner alive, yet unable to bring themselves to complete the murder before escaping. The Persian king dies before Alexander can reach him, or perhaps moments after. Ancient sources disagree on whether the two monarchs exchanged final words. What remains certain is the profound symbolic weight of this moment. The man who ruled from the Aegean to the Indus, who commanded resources beyond imagination, who embodied 2 centuries of Persian imperial glory, expires in a dusty wagon on a remote plateau, abandoned by those who should have defended him. Alexander orders royal honors for his fallen rival. The body receives proper preparation and transport to Persepolis for burial among Achaemenid ancestors. This gesture carries political calculation alongside genuine respect. Alexander presents himself not as foreign conqueror, but as legitimate successor, avenging the murdered king against treacherous rebels. The pursuit now shifts target. Bessus has proclaimed himself Artaxerxes V, claiming the royal title and rallying eastern resistance. The satrap retreats into Bactria, his homeland, where mountain fortresses and loyal warriors might sustain prolonged resistance. Alexander cannot permit this challenge to stand. The campaign that began as conquest of the Persian Empire transforms into suppression of rebellion within territories Alexander now claims as his own. The Iranian plateau stretches endlessly eastward, its horizons promising years of further warfare. Darius is dead, but the empire's eastern half remains unconquered. Bessus gathers forces beyond the Hindu Kush. Local populations watch the approaching Macedonians with uncertain loyalty. The pursuit continues. The Hindu Kush rises like a wall between worlds, its peaks scraping the sky at heights that steal breath from lowland soldiers. Alexander's army begins the crossing in spring of 329 before Christ, climbing passes still choked with winter snow. Men and horses struggle through drifts that reach their chests. Pack animals collapse and freeze where they fall. The army that conquered Persia in pitched battle now fights against the mountains themselves. 17 days of climbing bring the Macedonians down into Bactria, the ancient satrapy that stretches across what later ages will call Afghanistan. Bessus has retreated before them, burning crops and villages to deny the invaders sustenance. The scorched earth strategy slows, but cannot stop the advance. Bessus's own nobles, seeing the relentless Macedonian pursuit, begin calculating their survival. Within weeks, conspirators seize the self-proclaimed king and offer him to Alexander in chains. The usurper who murdered Darius meets his own brutal end, mutilated and executed as a regicide. Yet, Bessus's death brings no peace. The eastern provinces erupt in resistance unlike anything the Macedonians have faced. This is not warfare between organized armies meeting on chosen fields. Sogdiana and Bactria offer guerrilla conflict, sudden ambushes in mountain passes, fortresses perched on seemingly unassailable rocks, populations that melt into the landscape only to strike again when the army moves on. The terrain itself becomes the enemy. Sogdiana sprawls across Central Asia, a land of irrigated valleys separated by vast stretches of steppe and desert. The Oxus and Jaxartes rivers define its boundaries, but between them lies country that swallows armies. Macedonian columns march for days without finding enemies to fight, then suffer devastating raids on their supply lines. Garrisons left to hold conquered towns are massacred when the main army moves on. Spidomenes emerges as the soul of resistance. This Sogdian nobleman commands no great army, but he understands his homeland as the invaders never can. His cavalry strikes from the steppe, destroys isolated detachments, then vanishes before pursuit can organize. A Macedonian force sent to hunt him is annihilated near Maracanda, the worst defeat Alexander's army suffers in the entire campaign. The loss of 2,000 men shocks an army accustomed to victory. Alexander responds with systematic brutality. Towns that resist are destroyed, their populations killed or enslaved. The Macedonians build a network of garrison cities, military colonies meant to hold the conquered territory through permanent occupation. Alexandria Eschate rises on the Jaxartes, the farthest outpost of Greek civilization, a statement that these lands now belong to the conqueror regardless of local resistance. The campaigns of 328 continue the grinding work of pacification. 7 fortress cities along the Polytimetus River fall in 2 days of savage assault. Rock fortresses that seem impregnable are taken through engineering ingenuity and suicidal courage. Volunteers scale sheer cliffs at night, planting flags on peaks the defenders believed no army could reach. The psychological impact proves as devastating as military force. Winter offers no respite. Alexander divides his forces, hunting resistance through the frozen landscape while establishing the administrative structures of permanent rule. Local nobles who submit receive positions in the new order. Those who continue resistance face extermination. The policy gradually erodes Sogdian unity as self-interest overcomes patriotic resistance. Spidomenes meets his end, not through Macedonian arms, but through the calculations of his own allies, his Scythian confederates, weary of endless warfare against an enemy who refuses to leave, murder the resistance leader, and send his head to Alexander. The gesture purchases peace, but confirms the transformation of the campaign from conquest to occupation. 2 years of mountain warfare have changed the Macedonian army. Veterans who crossed the Hellespont as liberators of Greek cities now serve as occupiers of alien lands. The Phalanx that shattered Persian formations at Gaugamela has learned to scale cliffs and hunt guerrillas through trackless wastes. Alexander himself has evolved from Greek crusader to Asian emperor, adopting Persian court ceremonies that disturb his Macedonian companions. The eastern frontier remains restless, but organized resistance has collapsed. Garrisons hold the major routes. Military colonies anchor Macedonian power. Local elites have been incorporated into the imperial system. The army prepares for the next campaign, toward India and the edge of the known world. The Sogdian rock rises from the valley floor like a fist of stone thrust against the sky, its sheer cliffs climbing hundreds of feet to a summit that locals claim only birds can reach. Winter snow blankets its upper reaches in early 328 before the Common Era, and the fortress perched atop this natural citadel shelters the last defiant nobles of Sogdiana, along with their families, treasures, and provisions sufficient for years of siege. Alexander's army arrives at the base and stares upward at walls that need no construction, defenses carved by geological time rather than human hands. The Sogdian defenders laugh from their heights, calling down that the Macedonians should seek soldiers with wings if they hope to take this place. The taunt reaches Alexander's ears and transforms into obsession. Volunteers step forward from the army's ranks, men skilled in mountain climbing from campaigns across the Hindu Kush. 300 soldiers begin their ascent through the night, driving iron tent pegs into ice-crusted rock faces, hauling themselves upward by rope and determination through darkness that hides their progress from watchful eyes above. Dawn reveals their silhouettes on the summit behind the fortress, white cloaks waving against the pale sky. The psychological impact proves devastating. Defenders who believed themselves impregnable find enemies materializing from impossible directions. Surrender comes swiftly, the fortress yielding without significant bloodshed. Among those who emerge from the captured citadel walks Roxana, daughter of the Bactrian nobleman Oxyartes, her beauty striking even amid the chaos of capitulation. Alexander's decision to marry follows with startling speed. The ceremony blends Macedonian and Persian traditions, the king cutting bread with his sword to share with his bride in the manner of his ancestors, while adopting elements of Eastern royal wedding customs. The union serves multiple purposes that ripple through the empire's political landscape. Marriage to a local noblewoman transforms Alexander from foreign conqueror to legitimate ruler with ties to the land's aristocratic families. Oxyartes, once a rebel commander, becomes a royal father-in-law with vested interest in Macedonian success. Other Sogdian nobles observe this elevation and calculate the advantages of cooperation over continued resistance. Yet, the wedding generates tremors through the Macedonian officer corps. Veterans who followed Philip's son across the Hellespont to liberate Greeks and punish Persia now watch their king take a barbarian bride. The adoption of Persian court ceremonial has already strained traditional Macedonian relationships between king and companions. This marriage pushes further into unfamiliar territory. The army camp spread across Bactrian valleys during the spring of 327 witness quiet conversations around evening fires. Old soldiers remember when Alexander was first among equals, accessible to any Macedonian who sought audience. Now, Persian nobles prostrate themselves before the king in the ceremony of proskinesis, and whispers suggest Alexander expects similar obeisance from Greeks and Macedonians. Tension crystallizes around the question of divine honors. Eastern subjects have always worshipped their kings as gods or god-touched rulers. Macedonian tradition recognizes royal authority without religious veneration. Alexander's increasing adoption of Persian customs blurs these distinctions in ways that trouble men raised on different assumptions about the relationship between mortals and divinity. The Pages conspiracy emerges from this atmosphere of cultural collision. young Macedonian nobles serving in the royal household plot assassination, their motivations mixing personal grievances with broader unease about the king's transformation. Discovery brings executions, including the philosopher Callisthenes, whose connection to the conspiracy remains disputed, but whose death eliminates a voice of traditional Greek values from the court. Spring campaigns resume with the army reorganized and reinforced. New recruits from eastern territories now march alongside Macedonian veterans, their integration into the military system reflecting Alexander's vision of a unified empire transcending ethnic boundaries. The Phalanx that will descend toward India carries soldiers from lands stretching back to the Aegean. Roxana accompanies the royal household as preparations finalize for the greatest gamble yet attempted. Beyond the mountains lies India, a land of legendary wealth and mystery, where rivers flow wider than any the Greeks have known, and kings command armies mounted on elephants. Alexander's ambition has found new horizons to conquer. The descent from the Hindu Kush brings Alexander's army into a world unlike any they have known. The Kabul River Valley opens before them in spring of 327, its waters swollen with snowmelt from peaks still white against the sky. Here the landscape transforms, the harsh mountain terrain giving way to fertile plains where unfamiliar crops grow in irrigated fields and villages cluster around ancient temples dedicated to gods the Greeks cannot name. The army divides for the advance into India. Hephaestion and Perdiccas lead the main force along the Kabul River toward the Indus, tasked with bridging that legendary waterway and securing the route forward. Alexander takes the more mobile units northward through the valleys of Bajor and Swat, where mountain tribes resist from fortified positions that must be reduced one by one. The campaign proves brutal, the defenders fighting with desperate courage against invaders whose reputation precedes them. The fortress of Aornos rises from a massive rock outcropping, its summit said to have defied even Heracles in mythological times. Alexander cannot resist the challenge. His engineers construct a causeway across a ravine to bring siege equipment within range, the work proceeding under constant harassment from defenders above. When the assault finally succeeds, the symbolic victory matters as much as the strategic gain. The conqueror has surpassed the demigod. Spring of 326 finds the reunited army crossing the Indus on a bridge of boats, entering the Punjab with its 5 great rivers flowing toward the distant sea. Local rulers submit or flee, their small kingdoms absorbed into the expanding empire. But ahead waits a different challenge entirely. King Porus commands the lands beyond the Hydaspes River, and he has no intention of surrendering. The monsoon has begun when Alexander reaches the Hydaspes in early summer. The river runs brown and swollen, its current treacherous, its far bank defended by an army that includes something the Macedonians have never faced in battle: war elephants. These massive beasts stand like living towers, their tusks fitted with bronze, their backs carrying platforms filled with archers. The horses of the companion cavalry refuse to approach them, maddened by the unfamiliar scent. Porus deploys his forces along the eastern bank, matching every Macedonian movement with counter-moves of his own. For weeks the two armies watch each other across the flooding river, Alexander feinting at multiple crossing points to keep his opponent guessing. Supply boats move constantly along the western shore, creating the impression of preparations at various locations. The Indian king cannot defend everywhere at once. The crossing comes on a stormy night when thunder masks the sounds of movement. Alexander leads a picked force upstream to a wooded island where boats have been secretly assembled. The rain falls in sheets as they push across the swollen current, reaching the far bank before dawn reveals their position. Porus must now divide his forces or abandon the river line entirely. The battle unfolds on rain-soaked ground where cavalry struggles for footing. Alexander's horse archers harass the Indian flanks while the Phalanx advances toward the elephant line. The great beasts prove terrifying but vulnerable, their mahouts targeted by javelin throwers, their legs attacked by infantry willing to dart beneath their massive bodies. Wounded elephants turn unpredictable, trampling friend and foe alike in their agony. Porus fights with extraordinary courage, directing his forces from atop the largest elephant until wounds force his surrender. When brought before Alexander, he requests treatment befitting a king. The conqueror, recognizing a worthy opponent, restores Porus to his throne as a client ruler, his kingdom expanded rather than diminished. Such generosity serves practical purposes, creating a loyal ally to govern territories too distant for direct Macedonian control. The army presses eastward through the monsoon, crossing river after river as the Punjab's waterways multiply toward the Ganges basin. Rumors reach the camp of kingdoms beyond, of armies numbering hundreds of thousands, of elephant herds that darken the plains. The soldiers have marched over 15,000 miles from Macedonia. Their equipment rots in the endless rain. Their spirits, unbroken through 8 years of conquest, finally begin to falter before the prospect of campaigns without end. The Hyphasis River marks the boundary where conquest finally meets its limit. At its banks in the late summer of 326 before Christ, the Macedonian army that has never known defeat confronts an enemy no phalanx can overcome, the exhaustion of its own spirit. The monsoon rains continue their relentless assault, turning the camp into a sea of mud where leather rots, metal rusts, and men sicken by the hundreds. Beyond the swollen river lies the Ganges Plain, where intelligence reports describe the Nanda Empire fielding 200,000 infantry, 20,000 cavalry, and thousands of war elephants. The soldiers who have followed Alexander from the Aegean to the Indus have nothing left to give. The mutiny unfolds not through violence, but through silence. When Alexander calls his officers to council, proposing the march toward the Ganges, he faces men who will not meet his eyes. Conus, a veteran commander who has fought beside the king since Granicus, speaks what others dare not voice. The army desires home. Wives have become strangers. Children have grown unrecognized. Parents have died unmourned. 8 years of continuous campaigning have hollowed these men of everything except the desperate wish to see Macedonia again before they die. Alexander retreats to his tent for 3 days, refusing food and counsel, hoping his soldiers will relent as they always have. They do not. For the first time in his life, the conqueror confronts a will stronger than his own. The sacrifices performed yield unfavorable omens, providing divine justification for what necessity demands. Alexander announces the retreat, and the army's cheers echo across the Punjab like thunder. The return journey transforms into a campaign of its own. Alexander divides his forces, sending Craterus with the elephants and veterans through the Bolan Pass toward Persia. Nearchus receives command of a newly constructed fleet, ordered to explore the sea route from the Indus Delta to the Persian Gulf. Alexander himself chooses the most punishing path, the Gedrosian Desert, a wasteland that has swallowed armies before. The Makran coastal desert stretches across what is now southern Pakistan and Iran, a landscape of sand, salt flats, and mountains that trap heat like a furnace. Alexander's column numbers perhaps 30,000 soldiers, plus an equal number of camp followers, women, children, and merchants who have accumulated during years of campaigning. They enter this wasteland in late summer of 325 before Christ, when temperatures exceed 120 degrees. The march becomes a death sentence. Water sources marked on Persian maps prove dry or poisoned with salt. Supply ships that should meet the column along the coast cannot land through the pounding surf. Men begin dying within days, collapsing from heat and thirst, their bodies left where they fall because the living lack strength to bury them. Pack animals perish by the thousands, their carcasses stripped for meat that spoils within hours. Flash floods prove as deadly as drought. Seasonal torrents roar through dry wadis without warning, sweeping away entire companies along with the baggage train. Women and children die in the greatest numbers, their bodies tumbling through muddy waters while survivors watch helplessly from higher ground. The army that conquered Persia stumbles forward like a column of ghosts. 60 days of horror reduce Alexander's force by perhaps 10,000 dead, possibly more. The survivors who finally reach the oasis of Pura in late autumn resemble refugees rather than conquerors. Alexander has shared every hardship, walking when his horse died, refusing water offered by soldiers until all could drink. His legend grows even as his army diminishes. The reunion at Susa brings the scattered forces together again. Nearchus arrives with tales of maritime wonders, his fleet having successfully navigated the unknown waters. Craterus marches in with his veterans intact. The empire endures, but something essential has broken. The army that refused at the Hyphasis will never again march with the same blind faith. The dream of world conquest has died in the Gedrosian sands, leaving only the question of what comes next. The empire Alexander has forged stretches from the Adriatic shores to the Indus Valley, encompassing lands where dozens of languages echo through marketplaces and temples honor gods bearing 100 different names. What emerges in the years following conquest is neither purely Greek nor wholly Eastern, but something unprecedented in human history. A vast experiment in cultural fusion that transforms daily existence for millions. In the great cities, life pulses with hybrid energy. Alexandria in Egypt rises from the Mediterranean shore as the empire's crown jewel, its grid of streets designed by Greek architects, but filled with Egyptian laborers, Jewish merchants, and traders from every corner of the known world. The harbor welcomes ships carrying grain from the Nile Delta, timber from Lebanon, spices from Arabia. Markets overflow with goods that would have seemed fantastical to previous generations. Indian cotton sold beside Macedonian wool, Persian carpets displayed next to Greek pottery. Administration requires constant negotiation between traditions. Alexander has retained Persian satraps in many provinces, allowing local governance structures to persist beneath Macedonian military oversight. Tax collectors speak multiple languages. Courts blend Greek legal concepts with ancient Babylonian precedents. The bureaucracy that once served Darius now serves Alexander, its scribes adapting cuneiform tablets to record transactions in Aramaic, Greek, and local tongues simultaneously. Temples stand as monuments to religious accommodation. In Babylon, priests of Marduk continue their ancient rituals, while Greek settlers establish shrines to Zeus nearby. Egyptian temples receive royal patronage, their priesthoods confirming Alexander as pharaoh according to traditions stretching back millennia. The oracle at Siwa has declared him son of Ammon, a title that resonates differently among Greeks who hear Zeus and Egyptians who hear their supreme deity. Daily existence for ordinary inhabitants varies enormously across the empire's breadth. A farmer in the Nile Valley notices little change: the same floods, the same harvests, the same taxes flowing to distant rulers. A merchant in Susa finds new opportunities as trade routes stabilize under unified authority. A craftsman in Bactria learns Greek decorative motifs to satisfy the tastes of new garrison commanders. Soldiers from Thessaly marry local women, their children growing up speaking two languages, belonging fully to neither world. The army camps themselves become crucibles of cultural mixing. Macedonian veterans share meals with Persian cavalry incorporated into Alexander's forces. Training grounds echo with commands translated between tongues. Young Persians learn the sarissa drill, while Macedonians adopt Eastern riding techniques. The fusion Alexander demands at the highest levels filters down through every rank. Cities founded along the march routes, the many Alexandrias scattered from Egypt to Afghanistan, serve as nodes of Hellenization. Greek theaters rise beside Eastern bazaars. Gymnasiums where young men exercise in the Greek fashion stand near bathhouses following Persian customs. These settlements plant seeds that will flower for centuries, spreading Greek language and thought far beyond anything the classical city-states imagined. Yet, beneath the surface harmony, tensions simmer. Traditional Greeks resent the elevation of conquered peoples to positions of honor. Persian nobles chafe at subordination to foreign masters, regardless of Alexander's gestures of respect. The fusion remains incomplete, imposed from above rather than growing organically from below. What Alexander has created through conquest and will alone may not survive his absence. The winter of 324 before Christ finds Alexander in Susa, orchestrating the most ambitious social experiment of his reign. Within the great hall of the Persian palace, 90 of his highest officers take Persian brides in a single ceremony, the king himself wedding two Achaemenid princesses to cement his claim as legitimate successor to Darius. The mass wedding unfolds over 5 days of feasting. Each couple seated on individual thrones arranged in a vast semicircle, the mingling of Macedonian military cloaks with Persian silk robes, creating a visual tapestry of the fusion Alexander demands. 10,000 common soldiers who have taken Asian wives receive wedding gifts and debt forgiveness. The treasury disperses staggering sums. Alexander's generosity attempting to purchase loyalty for a vision many of his men neither understand nor desire. The celebrations mask deeper anxieties. Veterans who have marched for a decade grow restless. The integration of Persian nobles into command positions breeds resentment among officers who conquered this empire through blood and suffering. Summer brings Alexander to Ecbatana, the cool mountain capital, offering respite from Mesopotamian heat. Here, amid games and theatrical performances, Hephaestion falls ill. The king's closest companion since childhood, his second self, the man who shares his dreams of universal empire, succumbs to fever within 7 days. Alexander's grief transcends all bounds of royal dignity. He lies upon the body for a day and night. He orders the physician executed. He commands the sacred fire of the empire extinguished, as if a king had died. The mourning that follows alarms even those accustomed to Alexander's intensity. He refuses food for days. He shears his hair in the ancient manner of Achilles grieving Patroclus. He orders a funeral pyre of unprecedented magnificence, its construction consuming talents of gold. Some whisper that something essential has broken within the king, that Hephaestion's death has severed his last connection to the young prince who once dreamed beside the Aegean. Spring of 323 brings Alexander to Babylon, despite warnings from Chaldean priests who read catastrophe in the heavens. The great city welcomes its master with the splendor befitting the center of the world. Plans multiply with manic energy. A fleet of 1,000 ships for Arabian conquest. Harbors to be carved along the Persian Gulf. Temples to be rebuilt across the empire. Alexander drives himself and his court relentlessly, as if racing against time only he perceives. Late May brings fever. The king continues working, conducting sacrifices, reviewing naval preparations, hosting officers at endless banquets. But the illness does not break. Day by day his voice weakens. Movement becomes difficult. He is carried to the palace beside the Euphrates, where cooler air might aid recovery. The fever burns higher. The army grows desperate. Rumors of the king's death spark near mutiny until soldiers are permitted to file past his bed. One by one, 20,000 men shuffle through the chamber where Alexander lies. He cannot speak, but raises his eyes to each face, acknowledging the bond forged through years of shared conquest. It is the last time most will see him alive. On the 11th of June, 323 before Christ, Alexander dies. He is 32 years old. When asked to whom he leaves his empire, legend claims he whispers a single word that might mean either the strongest or a specific general's name. The ambiguity will drown the world in blood. His body lies in state while generals gather like wolves. No legitimate heir exists. Roxana carries an unborn child. A half-brother suffers mental incapacity. The empire Alexander built through superhuman will possesses no mechanism for succession, no tradition of orderly transfer. It is a creation of one man's genius, and that man now lies silent in Babylon's heat. Within hours, the unity begins cracking. Commanders who shared tents and battles eye each other with suspicion. The funeral cortege that will eventually carry Alexander toward Egypt becomes itself a prize worth fighting over. The empire that stretched from the Adriatic to the Indus, built in 13 years of relentless campaigning, begins its long dissolution before its creator's body grows cold. The corpse becomes a battlefield before the flesh grows cold. Within the palace walls of Babylon, where incense still burns for the dying king, his generals transform from brothers in arms into rivals circling a throne that belongs to no one. The summer of 323 before Christ witnesses the beginning of a catastrophe that will consume everything Alexander built. Perdiccas emerges first from the chaos. As Chiliarch, second in command, he holds Alexander's signet ring, pressed into his palm during those final delirious hours. This small circle of gold becomes his claim to regency, though the legitimacy it confers proves fragile as morning frost. The infantry, loyal to Macedonian blood, demands that Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother, take the throne despite his mental limitations. The cavalry officers prefer waiting for Roxana's unborn child. The compromise satisfies no one. Aridaeus becomes Philip III, a king who cannot rule, while the Regency Council fragments into factions before its first meeting concludes. The funeral cortege itself becomes a prize worth stealing. Alexander had requested burial at Siwa, among the sands where the oracle proclaimed him son of Ammon. Perdiccas plans to honor this wish, understanding that whoever controls the body controls the legitimacy of succession. But Ptolemy, satrap of Egypt, has other designs. His agents intercept the magnificent hearse somewhere in Syria, redirecting the golden sarcophagus toward Memphis. The theft is audacious, calculated, and successful. Alexander's remains will anchor Ptolemy's claim to Egypt for generations. The catafalque that carries the conqueror's body defies description. Ancient sources speak of a temple on wheels, its roof supported by golden columns, its walls decorated with paintings depicting Alexander's victories. 64 mules draw this mobile mausoleum, their harnesses studded with gems, golden bells chiming with each step. The procession moves slowly through lands Alexander conquered, crowds gathering to witness the passage of their dead god-king. When Ptolemy seizes it, he captures not merely bones, but mythology itself. War erupts with terrible swiftness. Perdiccas marches against Egypt in 321 before Christ, determined to recover the stolen body and punish Ptolemy's defiance. The campaign ends in disaster at the Nile. Attempting to cross the river near Memphis, Perdiccas loses over 2,000 men to crocodiles and currents. His own officers, disgusted by the failure, murder him in his tent. The first regent dies not in battle, but by assassination, establishing a pattern that will claim nearly every major figure of the succession wars. The conference at Triparadisus in Syria attempts to restore order. Antipater, the aged general who governed Macedonia during Alexander's absence, assumes the regency. Territories are redistributed, commands reassigned, grievances theoretically addressed. Yet the settlement merely reshuffles the pieces. Antigonus receives command of the war against Eumenes, Alexander's Greek secretary, who commands the only army still loyal to the royal house. Seleucus gains Babylon. Lysimachus holds Thrace. Each man begins fortifying his position, knowing that the next round of bloodshed approaches inevitably. The royal family suffers most grievously. Roxana, protecting her infant son Alexander IV, eliminates rivals with ruthless efficiency. Statira, Darius's daughter, whom Alexander married at Susa, dies by poison. Other potential claimants disappear into unmarked graves. The Argead dynasty, which produced Philip and Alexander, consumes itself in fratricide, while generals carve the empire into personal kingdoms. By 320 before Christ, the unity Alexander forged through conquest exists only in memory. His generals command armies that once marched together toward the sunrise. His cities bear his name, but answer to competing masters. His dream of fusing Greek and Persian into a universal civilization fragments into warring successor states. The funeral games have only begun, and decades of bloodshed await before new kingdoms stabilize from the wreckage of his ambition. The wreckage of Alexander's empire becomes the crucible for a new age of warfare. From 320 before Christ onward, the men who once served as his generals transform into kings, each claiming legitimacy through force of arms and the territories they can hold against rivals. The Diadochi Wars reshaped the ancient world through 4 decades of relentless conflict. Antigonus One-Eye emerges as the most ambitious of the successors. From his base in Phrygia, this veteran commander who lost an eye in Philip's early campaigns now envisions reuniting Alexander's realm under his own rule. His son Demetrius, called the Besieger, commands fleets and armies with tactical brilliance inherited from the Macedonian military tradition. Together, they represent the greatest threat to the other Diadochi. Ptolemy consolidates Egypt with methodical precision. The Nile's wealth funds mercenary armies while natural barriers protect his kingdom from invasion. He seizes Alexander's corpse during its journey toward Macedonia, installing it in a magnificent tomb at Alexandria. This symbolic capture transforms his realm into the legitimate heir of Alexander's legacy in the eyes of many Greeks. Seleucus carves his domain from the eastern satrapies. Babylon becomes his capital, and from there he extends control across Mesopotamia, Persia, and eventually the vast territory stretching toward India. His cavalry forces, supplemented by war elephants acquired through treaty with the Mauryan king Chandragupta, give him unique military advantages. Cassander holds Macedonia itself, ruling through marriage to Alexander's half-sister, Thessaloniki. He eliminates the remaining Argead bloodline with cold calculation, executing the young king Alexander IV and his mother Olympias. The dynasty that produced the world conqueror ends in a Macedonian prison. Lysimachus controls Thrace and portions of Asia Minor, building his power through strategic patience while rivals exhaust themselves in larger conflicts. The battles that decide this era dwarf anything the Greek world witnessed before Alexander. Siege warfare reaches unprecedented sophistication as Demetrius deploys massive towers against the walls of Rhodes in 305 before Christ. His Hellepolis, a siege tower 9 stories tall, sheathed in iron plates, becomes legendary even in failure. The Rhodians resist for a year, earning Demetrius his epithet while demonstrating that even the mightiest war machines cannot guarantee victory. Naval warfare transforms the eastern Mediterranean into contested waters. Fleets of hundreds of warships clash near Cyprus in 306 before Christ, where Demetrius destroys Ptolemy's navy and briefly establishes Antigonid supremacy at sea. The victory prompts Antigonus and Demetrius to proclaim themselves kings, abandoning the fiction that they rule as regents for Alexander's heirs. The other Diadochi respond by assuming royal titles themselves. By 304 before Christ, 5 separate kingdoms claim descent from Alexander's conquests. The empire exists now only as competing fragments, each ruled by a crowned monarch rather than a satrap serving a central authority. Coalition warfare becomes the pattern of survival. When one successor grows too powerful, the others unite against him. Antigonus faces this reality at Ipsus in 301 before Christ. The plains of central Phrygia witnessed the largest battle since Gaugamela, as Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander combine their forces against the Antigonid threat. Seleucus deploys 500 war elephants acquired from India, creating an impenetrable barrier that separates Demetrius and his victorious cavalry from the main battle. Antigonus, now over 80 years old, stands with his phalanx as enemy forces close from multiple directions. A javelin ends his dream of reunification. His body lies on the battlefield, while Demetrius flees with the survivors. Ipsus settles the fundamental question of Alexander's succession. No single ruler will reunite the empire. The Hellenistic world crystallizes into permanent division, 3 major kingdoms emerging from the chaos to shape Mediterranean civilization for the next 2 centuries. The dust of Ipsus settles into a new cartography of power. 3 dynasties emerge from the wreckage of Alexander's dream, each claiming legitimacy through blood, conquest, or sheer survival. The Hellenistic age crystallizes into distinct kingdoms that will dominate the eastern Mediterranean for nearly 2 centuries. Ptolemaic Egypt becomes the most stable of the successor states. The Nile's predictable floods and Egypt's natural boundaries create a defensible realm of extraordinary wealth. Alexandria rises as the jewel of this kingdom, its lighthouse guiding ships into the greatest harbor of the ancient world. The Ptolemies rule as pharaohs, adopting Egyptian religious traditions while maintaining Greek as the language of administration. The great library and museum transform the city into an intellectual capital where scholars from across the Mediterranean gather to preserve and expand human knowledge. The Seleucid realm sprawls across the Asian heartland, from the Aegean coast to the borders of India. Antioch on the Orontes becomes its western capital, a planned city of colonnaded streets and magnificent temples. The Seleucids face the impossible task of governing dozens of peoples speaking countless languages across terrain, ranging from Mediterranean coastline to Central Asian steppe. They establish hundreds of Greek cities as islands of Hellenic culture in an ocean of older civilizations, creating a network of urban centers that spread Greek language and customs eastward. Antigonid Macedonia, the ancestral homeland, proves the most contested prize. Cassander's line fails within a generation, and the kingdom passes through multiple hands before Antigonus Gonatas, grandson of the one-eyed general who fell at Ipsus, finally establishes stable rule. Macedonia remains the smallest of the three great kingdoms, but retains its reputation for producing the finest soldiers in the Greek world. These kingdoms develop sophisticated bureaucracies, professional armies, and court cultures of remarkable refinement. Greek becomes the common language of educated elites from Sicily to Bactria. Philosophers, scientists, and artists move freely between royal courts, seeking patronage and intellectual community. The Hellenistic world achieves a cosmopolitan character unknown in the classical age. Yet beneath the surface of cultural unity, the kingdoms wage constant warfare. The Syrian wars between Ptolemies and Seleucids rage across 6 generations, devastating the Levantine coastline. Macedonia struggles against Celtic invasions and Greek leagues seeking independence. The Seleucids gradually lose their eastern provinces to Parthian expansion and Bactrian secession. A new power watches from the west. Rome, having unified Italy, begins extending its influence into the Greek world. Pyrrhus of Epirus discovers that Roman legions fight with terrifying persistence. The Macedonian Phalanx, supreme for 2 centuries, will soon meet its match on the plains of Thessaly and the hills of Asia Minor. The Hellenistic kingdoms, consumed by their rivalries, fail to recognize the gathering storm until Roman eagles cast shadows over their palace walls. The Roman eagles descend upon the Hellenistic world with methodical precision. In 168 before Christ, at Pydna in Macedonia, the legions of Lucius Aemilius Paulus shatter the Antigonid Phalanx in a single afternoon. The sarissa, that revolutionary weapon Philip forged 2 centuries earlier, proves fatally inflexible against the adaptable Roman maniple. Perseus, the last Macedonian king, flees the field and soon surrenders. The kingdom that conquered Persia becomes 4 Roman client republics, then a province. The homeland of Alexander passes into foreign hands forever. The other kingdoms follow. Corinth burns in 146 before Christ, its treasures shipped to Rome, its population enslaved. The Seleucid realm, already hemorrhaging territories to Parthia, shrinks to a Syrian rump state before Pompey annexes it in 63 before Christ. Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemies, watches Roman civil wars consume her dynasty's independence. When Octavian's forces breach Alexandria in 30 before Christ, She chooses death over the humiliation of a Roman triumph. The final Hellenistic kingdom expires, and the Mediterranean becomes a Roman lake. Yet conquest proves the ultimate tribute. Rome absorbs not merely territory but civilization itself. Greek becomes the language of the Eastern Empire, of philosophy, of the educated elite. Roman generals study Alexander's campaigns as military scripture. Julius Caesar weeps before a statue of the conqueror in Spain, lamenting his own lesser achievements. Augustus visits Alexander's tomb in Alexandria, placing flowers upon the crystal sarcophagus. The Macedonian king becomes the measure against which all subsequent conquerors judge themselves. The myth grows beyond history. Alexander enters the folklore of peoples he never encountered. The Romance of Alexander, composed in Greek around the 3rd century of the Common Era, spawns translations into 35 languages from Iceland to Indonesia. Persian poets celebrate Iskandar as a philosopher king seeking the water of life. Jewish traditions claim he prostrated before the high priest in Jerusalem. Ethiopian chronicles make him a Christian saint. The historical figure dissolves into universal archetype. The Hellenistic cultural synthesis proves more durable than any kingdom. The Library of Alexandria, though eventually destroyed, establishes the model for systematic knowledge preservation. Euclid's geometry, Archimedes' physics, Eratosthenes' calculation of Earth's circumference. These achievements emerge from institutions Alexander's successors founded. The Septuagint translation of Hebrew scriptures into Greek shapes early Christianity. Paul of Tarsus preaches in Greek to audiences across Alexander's former domains. The common tongue the conqueror spread becomes the vehicle for a new world religion. Modern archaeology resurrects the physical empire. 19th century excavators uncover Vergina's royal tombs, finding golden larnates containing bones that may belong to Philip himself. The mosaic floors of Pella reveal artistic sophistication that challenges assumptions about Macedonian barbarism. In Afghanistan, French archaeologists discover Ai-Khanoum, a Greek city with gymnasium and theater deep in Central Asia. The material evidence confirms ancient accounts once dismissed as exaggeration. Museums across the world preserve fragments of this vanished realm. The British Museum displays the Nereid monument from Lycian Xanthos. The Louvre houses the winged victory of Samothrace. Berlin's Pergamon altar reconstructs Hellenistic monumental art. In Cairo, the Egyptian Museum holds artifacts from the Ptolemaic synthesis of Greek and Pharaonic traditions. Each object testifies to the cultural explosion Alexander's conquests ignited. The conqueror's influence echoes through subsequent millennia. Napoleon carries histories of Alexander on his Egyptian campaign. Military academies still analyze the oblique attack at Gaugamela. The very concept of world empire, of universal rule transcending ethnic and geographic boundaries, traces to the Macedonian vision. Alexander demonstrated that audacity combined with organization could reshape the possible. The small mountain kingdom that Greek sophisticates once mocked as semi-barbarian transformed human civilization. From the highlands of northern Greece emerged a force that connected Mediterranean and Indian Ocean, that fused Persian administration with Greek philosophy, that created a cosmopolitan world, anticipating modernity itself. The empire lasted barely a generation. Its legacy endures still. Thank you for journeying through the complete history of Macedonia and Alexander's world-changing empire. If these stories of ancient civilizations captivate you, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next documentary exploration into history's greatest powers.